The sweat dripped from Nora Nichols's forehead as she hauled the wooden bucket upward, her arms trembling with exhaustion she couldn't quite explain. It was August 1882 in Laramie, Wyoming, and the summer heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, but this weakness spreading through her limbs felt different from simple fatigue. She had walked 3 miles from her family's failing ranch to draw water from the community well on the edge of town, just as she did every other day. But today, the distance felt impossibly long. Her vision blurred at the edges, and a strange chill ran through her despite the blazing sun overhead. The bucket reached the top of the well just as her knees buckled. Nora felt the rough ground rise up to meet her, heard the splash of precious water spilling across the dusty earth, and then everything went dark. Vincent Raleigh was riding back from checking fence lines on the McAllister spread when he spotted the crumpled figure beside the well. He'd been working as a ranch hand in the territory for nearly 5 years now, and something about the stillness of that form made his stomach clench with worry. He urged his horse forward, swinging down from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, with dark hair plastered to her face with sweat. Vincent knelt beside her and gently touched her shoulder. The heat radiating from her body shocked him, even through her faded calico dress. This wasn't heat stroke. This was fever, and a bad one. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was rough from days of little conversation, but gentle. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Vincent looked around, searching for anyone who might know her. But the well sat at a lonely crossroads with only prairie grass stretching in 3 directions, and Laramie proper about a 1/4 mile south. He couldn't leave her here. Vincent scooped fresh water from the well with his cupped hands and let it drip across her forehead and lips. She stirred slightly, a small sound escaping her throat. That was something, at least. The right thing would be to take her into town, to the doctor or the boarding house, but Vincent had seen too many frontier physicians who knew less about healing than a fence post. And moving her in this condition, bouncing along on horseback, seemed dangerous. The well at least had water and a bit of shade from a scraggly cottonwood that grew nearby. Vincent made his decision quickly. He rode hard to the general store in Laramie, bought supplies with most of the money in his pockets, and returned within the hour. The girl hadn't moved, still lying where she'd fallen, her breathing shallow and rapid. He set up camp. It wasn't much his bedroll spread in the shade, his canteen refilled, strips of cloth torn from an old shirt to use as compresses. Vincent carefully moved her onto the bedroll, trying to be respectful, keeping his touch impersonal even as worry gnawed at him. Up close, he could see the hollows under her cheekbones, the roughness of her hands. This was someone who knew hard work, who probably didn't have much choice about it. "You're going to be all right," he told her, not sure if he believed it. "I'm going to help you." The fever raged through that first day. Vincent kept a rotation of cool compresses on her forehead, coaxed tiny sips of water between her lips whenever she seemed even slightly conscious. She muttered things he couldn't understand, sometimes thrashing weakly, and he had to hold her still to keep her from rolling off the bedroll. As the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and purple, Vincent finally got a good look at her face in the softer light. She was pretty, he supposed, though that seemed beside the point when she was this sick. What struck him more was something in her features, a determination visible even in unconsciousness, a stubbornness in the set of her jaw. This was a fighter. "That's good," he said aloud, dampening another cloth. "You fight this thing." His horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Rusty, grazed nearby, hobbled but content. Vincent had worked for Ezra McAllister long enough that missing a day or two wouldn't cost him his job, probably. McAllister was a fair man, one of the few truly decent ranchers in the territory. Still, Vincent couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. Night fell, bringing relief from the heat but new worries. The fever seemed worse somehow in the darkness, her whole body shaking with tremors. Vincent built a small fire for light and warmth, then sat beside her, continuing his vigil. Every hour or so he would walk to the well, draw fresh water, and return to bathe her face and hands. "My name's Vincent," he told her during one of these sessions, speaking partly to stay awake, partly on the slim chance she could hear him. "Vincent Raleigh. I work cattle mostly, some horse breaking when the pay's good. Been in Wyoming territory about 5 years now, came up from Colorado before that. Don't have much family to speak of, just an uncle somewhere in Montana I haven't seen since I was 16. The one-sided conversation felt strange, but it helped pass the long hours. Vincent talked about the ranch, about Rusty, about the time he'd seen an eagle take down a prairie dog in midair. Anything to fill the silence. Morning came slowly, the sky lightening degree by degree until full dawn broke across the plains. Nora's fever hadn't broken. Vincent felt exhaustion pulling at him, but he forced himself to stay alert. He made a thin broth from the jerky and hardtack he'd bought, managing to get a few spoonfuls down her throat. It wasn't much, but it was something. A rider appeared around mid-morning, an older man on a gray mare. He pulled up near the well, eyeing Vincent with understandable suspicion. "What's going on here?" the man asked, his hand resting near the pistol on his hip. Vincent stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and clear. "Found this young lady collapsed yesterday. She's got a fever that won't quit. I've been trying to keep her cooled down and hydrated." The older man dismounted and approached cautiously. His expression softened when he got a look at Nora. "That's the Nichols girl, Nora. Her pa has a hardscrabble place northeast of here. Lost his wife 2 winters back, been struggling ever since. She needs proper care," Vincent said, "but I was worried about moving her. Fever's bad enough she's barely conscious." The man nodded slowly. "Name's Thomas Webb. I know her father, William. He's probably frantic wondering where she is. I'll ride out and let him know she's here, that she's being looked after." He paused, studying Vincent. "You're McAllister's man, aren't you, Vincent?" "Yes, sir." "Ezra speaks well of you. I'll let him know where you are, too." Webb mounted his horse again. "I'll send word to Doc Henderson in town as well. Though between you and me, he's mostly good for pulling teeth and setting bones. Fever like this just has to run its course. You're doing the right thing, keeping her cool and getting water in her." After Webb rode off, Vincent felt some small relief. At least now people knew, and he wouldn't be mistaken for someone with ill intentions. He returned to Nora's side, checking her temperature with the back of his hand against her forehead, still burning up. The second day passed much like the first. Vincent maintained his routine: cool water, damp cloths, tiny sips forced between cracked lips. He dozed in brief snatches, never letting himself fall into deep sleep. Once in the afternoon her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were brown, he noticed, a deep brown like rich earth. "Water," she whispered, the single word barely audible. "I've got you." Vincent lifted her head gently and held his canteen to her lips. She managed a few swallows before her eyes closed again, but it felt like a victory. That evening, a wagon rattled up to the well. A tall, weathered man jumped down before the horses had fully stopped. His face was lined with worry and something harder, the kind of worn-down exhaustion that came from too many years of too much struggle. "Nora." He rushed over, dropping to his knees beside the bedroll. "Baby girl, what happened, Mr. Nichols?" Vincent stood, giving the man space. "I'm Vincent Raleigh. I found her collapsed here day before yesterday. She's burning with fever, but I've been keeping her as comfortable as I can." William Nichols looked up at him, and Vincent saw tears in the older man's eyes. "Thank you. God, thank you. I was working the far pasture, didn't even know she'd gone for water. When she didn't come home that first night, I thought." He couldn't finish the sentence. Vincent understood. The frontier was dangerous for a woman alone. Many terrible things could have happened. "She's a fighter," Vincent said. "The fever's bad, but she's still fighting." William smoothed his daughter's hair back from her face with a gentleness that spoke of deep love. "Her mother died of a fever. Winter of '80. I can't lose Nora too. She's all I have left." The fear in those words made Vincent's chest tighten. He'd lost his own parents young, knew that particular species of loneliness. "I've got supplies," William said, seeming to pull himself together. "I brought blankets, food, medicine if it'll help. I'll stay with her now." "You've done more than enough, son. I can't repay you, but I won't forget it." Vincent shook his head. "I'll stay if you don't mind the company. 2 of us can keep watch better than 1. William looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that." They worked together through the night, taking turns with the compresses and the water. William talked about his daughter, painting a picture of a strong-willed young woman who'd taken on all the responsibilities of running a household after her mother died. She could rope and ride better than most men, could shoot straight, could work dawn to dusk without complaint. "She shouldn't have to," William said quietly around midnight, the 2 men sitting by the fire while Nora slept restlessly nearby. 22 years old and working herself to the bone on a ranch that's barely holding together. She deserves better. A husband, children of her own, a real life. But what man wants to take on a failing ranch and a broke father-in-law? "The right man wouldn't care about any of that," Vincent said. William glanced at him, something speculative in his expression, but he didn't respond. Dawn of the 3rd day brought a change. Nora's fever seemed to peak, her body burning hotter than ever, and Vincent felt genuine fear for the first time. William held his daughter's hand, whispering prayers, and Vincent found himself adding his own silent pleas to whoever might be listening. Then, slowly, as the morning sun climbed higher, the fever began to break. It started with sweat, beading on her forehead and neck. Her breathing eased, became deeper and more regular. By noon, when Vincent checked her temperature, the terrifying heat had diminished to something more manageable. "Thank God," William breathed. "Thank God." Nora's eyes opened late that afternoon. She looked confused, taking in her surroundings with obvious difficulty. "Pa," her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, "I'm here, baby girl. You're going to be all right." Her gaze shifted, landing on Vincent. "Who?" "This is Vincent Raleigh," William explained. "He's the man who saved your life, found you collapsed at the well 3 days ago and has been caring for you ever since." 3 days. The confusion in her expression deepened. Vincent watched her try to piece together memories that clearly weren't there. "The well," she murmured. "I came for water. I felt so strange, so hot and cold at the same time." Her eyes found Vincent's again. "You stayed," he nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. "Couldn't very well leave you." Most people would have. There was something in her voice, a knowledge of how hard this world could be, that made Vincent's heart squeeze. Over the next few hours, Nora slowly became more alert. Vincent and William helped her sit up, gave her more broth, watched the color gradually return to her face. She was weak, could barely hold the cup without help, but she was awake and aware, and the fever was truly gone. As evening approached, William made a decision. "We need to get you home to a real bed. Think you can handle a wagon ride?" Nora nodded, though Vincent could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. They made a nest of blankets in the wagon bed, and Vincent lifted her as carefully as he could, struck by how light she felt. She must have been working herself to exhaustion for months, maybe years. He settled her gently, making sure she was comfortable. "Thank you," she said, catching his hand as he started to pull away. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were intense. "Thank you for not leaving me." "You're welcome." The words felt inadequate. William shook his hand firmly. "Come by the ranch sometime. It's not much, but you'll always have a meal and a place to sleep. It's about 9 miles northeast. You follow the creek to where it splits and then head toward that double peak." Vincent nodded, committing the directions to memory, though he wasn't sure he'd take the man up on it. He'd done what anyone decent would do. No need to make more of it than that. He watched the wagon roll away into the gathering dusk, then packed up his own gear and mounted Rusty. The ride back to the McAllister ranch felt strange, as though the last 3 days had happened in some other world. Ezra McAllister met him at the barn, a stocky man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Webb told me what happened. The Nichols girl all right?" "Fever broke this afternoon. She's weak, but she'll recover." "Good, that's good." Ezra studied him. "You look like hell, Vincent. Get some sleep. Your work will keep another day." Vincent did sleep, falling into his bunk in the hands' quarters and not waking for 14 hours. When he finally roused, it was evening again, a full day lost. He felt fuzzy-headed and strange, as though something had shifted while he wasn't paying attention. He tried to fall back into his normal routine. There were cattle to move, fences to mend, 100 small tasks that made up ranch work. But he found his thoughts drifting to a pair of dark brown eyes, to the feeling of someone's life in his hands, to words spoken in a fever that he'd never share with anyone. 2 weeks passed. Vincent told himself he wasn't thinking about Nora Nichols, even as he clearly was. He'd done his good deed. She was fine now, back home with her father. There was no reason to ride 9 miles to check on someone who surely had everything she needed, but the pull was there, persistent and growing stronger. Finally, on a Sunday afternoon when McAllister had given the hands time off, Vincent found himself saddling Rusty and heading northeast. He told himself he was just exploring the territory, checking out areas he hadn't seen before. The fact that he was following a creek toward a double peak was pure coincidence. The Nichols ranch, when he found it, was as hardscrabble as William had implied. The main house needed repairs. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and the pastures held maybe 30 head of cattle, most of them looking as worn down as everything else. But there was something determined about the place, as though it was refusing to give up despite all evidence suggesting it should. Vincent spotted Nora before she saw him. She was in the corral, working with a young horse on a lead line. She moved carefully, still not back to full strength, but with obvious skill. The horse responded to her voice and gestures, circling smoothly. She looked up as Rusty's hooves sounded on the hard, packed earth. For a moment, Vincent couldn't read her expression. Then she smiled and something in his chest loosened. "Vincent Raleigh." She said his name like she'd been thinking about it. "I wondered if you'd come." He dismounted, suddenly uncertain. "Wanted to see how you were healing up." "Well enough." She led the young horse over to the fence and tied him off, then walked toward Vincent. She looked better, the hollows under her eyes less pronounced, though she was still too thin. "I don't remember much from those days at the well. Pieces here and there like a dream. Pa told me you stayed the whole time, that you kept bringing me water, keeping the fever down. Anyone would have done the same." "No." She shook her head firmly. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have gotten me to town and handed me off to whoever would take me. You stayed." She looked at him directly. Why, Vincent wasn't sure how to answer that. "You needed help." "Lots of people need help. You didn't know me from Eve." "Does it matter?" He felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "You're all right, that's what counts." Nora studied him a moment longer, then seemed to accept his non-answer. "Would you like some coffee? It's not much, but it's hot." They sat on the porch of the house, drinking coffee that was indeed terrible, burnt and weak at the same time, an impressive combination. William was in town buying supplies, Nora explained, so it was just her holding down the ranch today. She talked about the place, about trying to keep it running, about the way everything seemed to need fixing at once, and there was never enough money or time. Vincent found himself offering advice, suggesting ways to maximize the limited resources they had. Before he knew it, 2 hours had passed. "I should head back," he said reluctantly. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. "Will you come again?" Nora asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question, as though she was taking a risk asking it. "If you'd like me to." "I would." She smiled at him, and Vincent felt that strange shifting sensation again, like the world tilting on its axis. He rode back to the McAllister ranch in a daze, already planning his next visit. It became a pattern. Every Sunday, Vincent would ride to the Nichols place. Sometimes William was there, sometimes just Nora. They worked together on small projects, fixing fence posts, patching the barn roof, training horses. Nora was smart and capable, picking up new skills quickly. She could discuss cattle breeding with as much knowledge as any rancher Vincent had met, and her observations about the land and weather were sharp and accurate. But it was more than that. She made him laugh with dry observations about their neighbors. She listened when he talked about his plans, his dreams of maybe having his own place someday. She was easy to be around in a way that Vincent had never experienced before. 6 weeks after he'd found her at the well, they were mending fence together on a bright September afternoon when she suddenly spoke. "I remember something from when I was sick." She kept her eyes on the wire she was stretching. "You talked to me. Told me about yourself, about your horse, about everything and nothing." Vincent felt heat rise in his face. "I wasn't sure you could hear any of that, pieces of it. Your voice kept pulling me back when I wanted to drift away." She looked at him then. "I don't think I thanked you properly. Not just for the water and the nursing, but for the talking, for making me want to come back." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Vincent wanted to tell her that she'd been on his mind every day since, that he looked forward to Sundays with an anticipation he'd never felt for anything before, that somewhere in the last weeks he'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you did. Come back, I mean." Nora's smile was knowing, as though she could hear all the words he hadn't said. She went back to the fence, but her shoulder brushed his as she worked, and Vincent thought maybe silence could communicate just as well as speech. William was no fool. He saw what was developing and, to Vincent's relief, seemed pleased by it. "You're good for her," he told Vincent one evening as they worked on repairing the barn door. "Haven't seen her this happy since her mother was alive. I care about her, sir." The admission felt enormous. "I can see that." "Question is, what are your intentions?" It was a fair question, one a father had every right to ask. Vincent set down his hammer and met William's eyes. "I'd like to court her properly, with your permission. I don't have much, just my wages and my horse and my skills. But I'm a hard worker, and I do everything in my power to make her happy." William considered this, then extended his hand. "You have my permission and my blessing. God knows you've already proven you'll take care of her when it matters." Vincent shook his hand, feeling something settle in his chest. This was real. This was happening. He asked Nora formally that same evening as they walked down to the creek in the golden light of sunset. "I'd like to court you if you're willing. Do this properly." She laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Vincent Raleigh, we've been courting for weeks now, but yes, I'm more than willing to make it official. I don't have much to offer right now, he felt compelled to say. Just my wages from the McAllister Ranch and whatever else I can pick up. But I'm saving money, and someday I want my own place. A real ranch where we could, he stopped, realizing he'd gotten ahead of himself. Where we could what? She was looking at him with that direct gaze he'd come to love. Build a life. Together, if that's something you might want. Nora reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. That's exactly what I want. They courted through autumn, watching the leaves turn gold on the cottonwoods, feeling the air grow crisp with approaching winter. Vincent was at the Nichols place every spare moment, helping with the endless work, but also stealing time just to be with Nora. They talked about everything, their pasts, their hopes, their fears. She told him about her mother, about the grief that still caught her sometimes. He told her about growing up mostly alone, about learning to rely on himself because there was no one else. You don't have to be alone anymore, she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the deepening sky. Neither do you. In October, Vincent spoke to Ezra McAllister about his plans. The rancher listened, then made an offer that left Vincent speechless. I've been thinking about expanding north, where the Nichols place borders my land. That ranch is struggling, but the land itself is good. What if I bought a parcel from William enough to give him breathing room and pay off his debts and gave you the option to buy it from me over time? You could run cattle on it, build it up, and eventually it'd be yours. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep being the hard worker I know you are, and that you'll treat that young lady right. That's payment enough for me. Vincent rode to the Nichols place that same evening, bursting with the news. Nora was feeding the chickens, and she looked up in surprise at his approach. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything's right. He swung down from Rusty and took her hands. McAllister made me an offer. He wants to buy some land from your father enough to clear his debts and then sell it to me over time. We could have our own place, Nora. Not much at first, but it would be ours. We could build something real. She stared at him, processing this. He'd do that, he said so. I need to work out details with your father, make sure he's willing, but Nora. Vincent took a breath, his heart hammering. Marry me. I know we haven't been courting that long, and I should probably wait to ask until I have more to offer, but I don't want to wait. I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you fighting that fever, refusing to give up. Marry me and let's build that life we talked about. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Yes. God, yes, Vincent. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. They talked with William that night, laying out McAllister's offer. The older man listened quietly, and when they finished, he nodded slowly. It's a good offer. More than fair. I'd be left with enough land to run a small operation, and the debt that's been crushing me would be gone. He looked at Vincent and Nora, sitting close together on the couch. And my daughter would be provided for, partnered with a good man. I can't ask for more than that. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. McAllister's lawyer drew up papers. William met with the banker in Laramie to settle his debts. Vincent and Nora walked the land that would be theirs, making plans for where to build a house, where to put pastures, how to grow the operation year by year. We'll start small, Vincent said as they stood on a slight rise looking out over rolling grassland. But we'll build something that lasts, something we can be proud of. Something to pass down, Nora added, and when Vincent looked at her questioningly, she blushed. Someday, when we're ready. They married in November, in a simple ceremony at the church in Laramie. Nora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Vincent bought a new shirt and spent an hour trying to tame his sun-bleached hair. Ezra McAllister stood up as his best man, and William gave his daughter away with tears running unashamedly down his weathered face. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about partnership and faith. Vincent barely heard the words, too focused on Nora's face, on the reality that she was choosing him, choosing this life together. "I do," she said when the moment came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," he echoed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They moved into a small cabin on their new land, and Vincent threw himself into the work of building the ranch. He worked for McAllister during the week, learning everything he could, then spent evenings and weekends on their own place. Nora was beside him for all of it, as capable and determined as he'd known she would be. William came over often, lending his experience and his hands. The three of them became a tight unit, working together to make both ranches thrive. The older man seemed younger somehow, the crushing weight of debt and worry lifted from his shoulders. Winter came hard that year, snow piling deep across the plains. Vincent and Nora weathered it in their cabin, learning the rhythms of being married. There were adjustments, of course, learning to share space, learning each other's habits and quirks. But mostly it was easy, natural, as though they'd been together for years instead of months. On the long winter nights, they talked about everything and nothing. Nora taught Vincent to read better. He could manage basic words, but she helped him tackle more complex material. He taught her things about cattle and horses he'd learned over years of ranch work. They played cards and told stories and made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside. "Are you happy?" Nora asked one evening as they lay tangled together, the fire crackling in the hearth. "Happier than I knew I could be." Vincent kissed her forehead. "You?" "So happy it scares me sometimes, like it might be too good to last." "It'll last." He said it with certainty. "We'll make sure of it." Spring brought new life to the land and new plans for the ranch. Vincent bought their first cattle with his saved wages and a small loan from McAllister, 20 head of good breeding stock. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Nora turned out to have a gift for managing the business side of things. She kept meticulous records, tracked expenses and income, corresponded with buyers in Denver and Cheyenne. Combined with Vincent's skills in handling stock and managing land, they made an effective team. By summer of 1883, the ranch was beginning to show real promise. Their herd had grown to 30 head, and they'd planted hay fields that were coming in thick and green. Vincent built a proper barn with William's help, and they improved the fencing across most of the property. In July, Nora told Vincent she was pregnant. He'd been mending tack in the barn when she found him, and the way she said his name made him look up immediately. "I'm with child." She said it simply, but her eyes held a mixture of joy and fear. Vincent dropped the bridle he was holding and crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I'm 6 weeks late and I've been sick most mornings." "This is wonderful." He pulled back to look at her face. "Isn't it? It's wonderful." "And terrifying. My mother died in childbirth, Vincent. Not with me, but 2 years before the fever took her. The baby was stillborn and Mama never recovered fully. I'm scared." He held her close, feeling the weight of that fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here with limited medical care. But dwelling on that fear wouldn't help anyone. "We'll get you the best care we can," he promised. "We'll make sure you have everything you need. And you're strong, Nora, the strongest person I know." She clung to him for a long moment, then straightened. "You're right. I can do this. We can do this." William was overjoyed at the news, already planning and building a cradle. Ezra McAllister's wife, Martha, a kind woman who Vincent had met only a few times, came by to offer advice and support. The community of ranchers and their families, spread thin across the territory, nevertheless rallied around them. Nora's pregnancy progressed through the late summer and into fall. She continued working as long as she could, finally slowing down only in the last months when her belly made riding and heavy labor impractical. Vincent hovered, probably too much, until she told him firmly that she was pregnant, not made of glass. In March of 1884, on a night when the wind was howling around their cabin, Nora went into labor. Martha McAllister came to help, along with another rancher's wife, a weathered woman named Sarah who'd birthed 6 children of her own. They sent Vincent and William outside, where the 2 men paced and worried and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. "She's strong," William kept saying, as much to himself as to Vincent. "She'll be fine. She has to be fine." The labor lasted through the night. Vincent wanted to break down the door to be with her, but Martha had forbidden it. "Women's work," she'd said firmly. "You just be in the way." Dawn was breaking across the eastern sky when they finally heard a baby's cry, thin and furious. Vincent and William froze, looking at each other. Then the cabin door opened and Martha appeared, smiling. "You have a son. And Nora's tired but well. Come meet your boy, Vincent." He walked into the cabin on shaking legs. Nora was propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "Our son," she said, holding the baby out to him. Vincent took the infant carefully, terrified he'd break something. The baby was so small, so perfect. Tiny fingers curled into fists, a shock of dark hair on his head, lungs that worked remarkably well judging by the volume of his cries. "He's perfect," Vincent managed. "You're perfect. God, Nora, you did it. We did it." She smiled tiredly. "What should we name him?" They discussed names but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at his son's face, Vincent thought of his own father, a good man who died too young. "What about James? James William, after your father." William, standing in the doorway, made a sound that might have been a sob. Nora reached for her father's hand. "James William Raleigh," she said. "It's perfect." The baby changed everything and nothing. Vincent had worried he wouldn't be a good father, having so little example of his own to follow, but he found that love came easily and naturally. He learned to change diapers and walk the floor at night when James was fussy. He sang songs he half remembered from childhood, making up words when he couldn't recall them. Nora recovered well from the birth, regaining her strength over the following weeks. By summer, she was back to working alongside Vincent, though they took turns so one of them was always near the house with James. The ranch continued to grow. Their herd increased steadily, and Vincent's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spread through the territory. They weren't rich, not by any means, but they were making it work. The land was paying for itself, and they were slowly building equity in their property. When James was 6 months old, William announced his intention to sell his remaining land and move in with them. "I'm getting older," he said over dinner one evening, "and I want to be close to my grandson. Besides, this place is doing better than mine ever did. Makes sense to combine resources." It was a good plan. They used the money from selling William's land to buy more breeding stock and improve their facilities. William took over much of the daily ranch work, freeing Vincent to take occasional jobs with other ranchers, bringing in additional income. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, branding in spring, drives to market in summer, preparing for winter when autumn came. James grew from a baby to a toddler, then to a small boy who followed his father and grandfather everywhere, learning the work before he could even properly walk. In 1886, Nora told Vincent she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear, though Vincent still worried. But the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in early 1887 their daughter was born. They named her Caroline Helen, Caroline after Vincent's mother and Helen after Nora's. Caroline was different from James, quieter, more observant, with a serious expression that could break into a sudden, brilliant smile. William doted on both grandchildren shamelessly, carving toys and telling stories, providing the children with the kind of doting grandfather every child deserved. By 1889, the ranch was firmly established. They ran 200 head of cattle across expanded acreage, had a solid barn and outbuildings, and a house that Vincent had enlarged twice to accommodate their growing family. They'd paid off their debt to McAllister ahead of schedule, and the land was fully theirs. Vincent sometimes thought back to that day at the well, to finding Nora collapsed in the dust, to the decision to stay rather than ride on. Everything good in his life had flowed from that moment, from choosing to help someone who needed it. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked one evening. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors while the children played in the yard. "That day I found you, how different my life would be if I'd ridden past." She leaned against his shoulder. "You wouldn't have ridden past, that's not who you are. Maybe, but I'm grateful I didn't, grateful for all of this. Me too." She turned her face up to kiss him. "Every single day." Life wasn't always easy. There were hard winters that killed cattle, dry summers that stunted the grass, market fluctuations that made money tight. William's health began to decline as he moved into his 60s, though he refused to slow down as much as he should. James, at 5, broke his arm falling from the corral fence, and the wait to see if the doctor had set it properly was excruciating. But the hard times were balanced by good ones. James's 6th birthday, when they gave him his first horse. Caroline learning to walk, taking her first wobbling steps across the kitchen floor. The spring when their best cow had twin calves, both healthy. The July afternoon when Vincent and Nora snuck away from the ranch, leaving William in charge, and went swimming in the creek like they were courting again. In 1890, they added to their family once more twin boys, which Nora declared was Vincent's fault somehow. They named them Michael Thomas and David Robert, and the chaos of 4 children under 8 years old made their house constantly noisy and lively. "Our hands are full," Nora said one night after finally getting all 4 children to sleep, collapsing onto the couch beside Vincent. "Fuller than I ever imagined." He pulled her close. "And I wouldn't change a thing," she laughed. "You say that now, wait until they're all teenagers at once." But even as she joked, Vincent could see the contentment in her face, the satisfaction of a life well lived. They'd built something real and lasting, just as he'd promised that evening when he proposed. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy, their love had only deepened with time. William passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1892, at the age of 67. It was Nora who found him, going to wake him for breakfast and discovering he'd simply not woken up. The grief was real and deep, but there was comfort in knowing he'd died happy, surrounded by family, having seen his daughter settled and his grandchildren growing strong. They buried him on a rise overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he'd loved. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect William had earned over a lifetime of hard work and honest dealing. "He loved you like his own son," Nora told Vincent as they stood by the grave after everyone had gone. "Told me so many times how grateful he was that I'd found you." "I was the lucky one." Vincent's throat was tight. "He gave me a family when I didn't have one, trusted me with his daughter. I owed him everything. He knew that, and it made him happy." Life continued as it always did. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities. James was serious and responsible, already showing the makings of a good rancher. Caroline was sharp and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble and dragging each other into their schemes. Vincent taught all of them the skills they'd need: how to ride, rope, brand, read the weather, judge cattle. Nora taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, and all the practical skills of running a household and a business. Together, they raised children who were competent and confident, ready to face whatever challenges the frontier might throw at them. In 1895, when Vincent was 36 and Nora 35, they sat on their porch one evening much like they'd done hundreds of times before. The children were finally in bed, the ranch work was done, and the summer air was warm and pleasant. "Remember when this was nothing but grass and dreams?" Nora asked, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. Vincent looked at the sturdy house, the well-built barn, the corrals and outbuildings, the cattle dotting the pastures. "Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. I was so scared back then, of being sick, of losing the ranch, of being alone. I'd pretty much accepted that life was just going to be hard work and worry, and that was all there was. And then you collapsed at a well." Vincent smiled. "And then a stubborn cowboy refused to leave me." She took his hand. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that fever. I don't know about that, but I'm glad I was there, glad I found you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, one of the twins called out in his sleep, and they heard Caroline's voice soothing him. James had wanted to sleep in the barn with a mare who was close to foaling, and Vincent had allowed it, knowing the boy was responsible enough. "We did good," Nora said finally. "All of this. We built something good. We did." Vincent pulled her closer. "And we're not done yet. Still a lot of years ahead, still a lot of living to do. A lot of loving, too." She turned to kiss him, and it was as sweet and powerful as their first kiss had been. They stayed on that porch late into the night, talking and dreaming and planning, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they'd face it together. The years that followed brought their own joys and challenges. In 1897, a neighboring rancher went bust, and Vincent bought his land, expanding their holdings significantly. James, now 13, took on more and more responsibility, becoming his father's right hand. Caroline declared her intention to become a teacher and began studying with exceptional focus. The twins were 11, and showing no signs of calming down, but they were also proving to be natural horsemen with an almost uncanny ability to handle even the most difficult stock. Nora, approaching 40, was as beautiful and capable as ever. There were silver threads in her dark hair now, lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the prairie sun, but Vincent thought she'd never looked better. She carried herself with a confidence born of knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. In 1899, the new century looming, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting all their neighbors and friends. Ezra and Martha McAllister came, both looking older but still spry. Other ranching families arrived with children of all ages. They roasted beef, played music, danced under the stars. Vincent stood with Nora, watching their children interact with the other young people. James was in deep conversation with one of the Patterson girls, a pretty blonde who couldn't seem to stop smiling at him. Caroline was organizing the younger children into some kind of game. The twins were attempting to teach a few boys their own age how to rope fence posts. "They're going to be fine," Nora said, following his gaze. "All of them. We raised them to be strong and capable, because we had a good example." Vincent gestured to where William's grave sat on its rise, visible even in the evening light. "Your father taught me what being part of a family meant. And you taught me that love doesn't have to be complicated." Sometimes it's just showing up every day and doing the work and choosing each other, over and over. I'll choose you every time. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. I know, that's why it works. The party continued late into the night, a celebration not just of the coming century but of community, of perseverance, of lives well lived on difficult land. When 1900 arrived, it brought changes. James, now 16 and nearly as tall as Vincent, announced he wanted to marry Clara Patterson. Vincent and Nora gave their blessing, though they insisted the couple wait until James was 18. Caroline received an offer to study at a teaching college in Cheyenne, a remarkable opportunity that Nora encouraged her to take despite Vincent's worry about his 15-year-old daughter living so far away. The twins were 13 and still inseparable, still causing trouble but also proving themselves valuable hands around the ranch. The world was changing too. There was talk of automobiles, of flying machines, of technologies that seemed like pure fantasy. Wyoming had been a state for a decade now, no longer a territory. The wildness of the frontier was slowly being tamed, though the land itself remained as demanding as ever. Vincent and Nora adapted as they always had. They installed a telephone line to the ranch, one of the first in their area, making it easier to conduct business and stay connected with their far-flung neighbors. They bought new equipment that made ranch work more efficient. They subscribed to newspapers and agricultural journals, always learning, always improving, but the core of their life remained the same. They still woke before dawn to work the ranch. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, talking through the day. They still held each other at night, finding comfort and passion in arms that had become achingly familiar over the years. In 1902, James married Clara in a ceremony held at the ranch. The whole community turned out, just as they had for Vincent and Nora's wedding nearly 20 years before. James was 18, Clara 17, both of them young but ready, shaped by the same hard land that had shaped their parents. Vincent stood beside his son, much as William had stood beside Nora, and felt the weight of time passing. This boy, this man now, had been a tiny infant in his arms just yesterday, or so it seemed. "Where had the years gone? You're thinking too hard," Nora whispered beside him. "Just enjoy this." She was right, as usual. Vincent focused on the joy of the moment, his son's happiness, Clara's beautiful smile. The community gathered to celebrate young love. It was good. It was right. James and Clara moved into a house Vincent and the twins had built on the far side of their property. The young couple would work the ranch alongside Vincent and Nora, eventually inheriting it when the time came. It was a good arrangement, keeping the family together while giving the newlyweds their own space. Caroline came home from her studies in the summer, full of ideas and stories about the wider world. She'd grown into a poised young woman, articulate and passionate about education. She planned to return to teach in Laramie, bringing learning to the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. The twins, now 15, were starting to differentiate from each other. Michael was interested in the business side of ranching, always asking about prices and markets and how to maximize profits. David loved the land itself, spending hours riding the farthest reaches of their property, learning every creek and rise, every place where cattle gathered and grass grew thick. "We have good children," Nora said one evening in 1903 as they prepared for bed. "I know parents are supposed to say that, but it's true. They're genuinely good people." "They had a good mother," Vincent pulled her close, "still do, and a good father. Don't sell yourself short." They were both 44 now, middle-aged by anyone's reckoning, though Vincent felt he could still work as hard as men half his age. The ranch was prosperous. Their children were thriving, and he had the love of a woman he'd worship until his dying day. Life was good. In 1904, Clara told them she was expecting. The news brought joy and, for Vincent and Nora, a strange feeling of coming full circle. They were going to be grandparents just as William had been. The cycle of life continuing, the ranch passing from one generation to the next. The baby, a boy they named William James after both grandfathers, arrived in early 1905. Vincent held his grandson with the same wonder he'd felt holding his own children, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features. "He looks like James did," Nora said, standing beside him. "And James looked like you." Vincent carefully handed the baby back to Clara. Beautiful. Being grandparents suited them. They were old enough to appreciate every moment, young enough to actively participate. Vincent taught little William to ride almost before the child could walk. Nora told him stories and sang the same songs she'd sung to their own children. The ranch house was full of life and laughter, exactly as it should be. Caroline married in 1906 to a lawyer from Laramie named Peter Hastings. It was a good match. Peter was intelligent and kind, and clearly adored Caroline. They would live in town, but promised to visit often. Vincent walked his daughter down the aisle, thinking of the serious little girl who'd asked 1,000 questions, now grown into a confident woman building her own life. The twins, now 18, were ready to strike out on their own. They'd saved money from their wages and, with Vincent's help, bought a piece of land adjoining the ranch. They'd build their own operation, small at first but with potential to grow. "I can't believe all our children are grown," Nora said the night after they helped the twins move the last of their belongings. "The house is going to seem empty. We still have James and Clara next door and William to spoil." Vincent pulled her into his arms. "And we have each other, same as always." "Same as always." She smiled up at him. "That's not a bad thing. It's the best thing." They settled into a new phase of life. With the children grown and managing their own affairs, Vincent and Nora had more time for each other. They took trips to Cheyenne, to Denver once, to see parts of Wyoming they'd never explored. They read books together in the evenings, sometimes discussing them late into the night. They made love with the ease and depth of long practice, still finding new ways to bring each other pleasure and joy. The ranch continued to thrive under their management and, increasingly, under James's. Vincent was proud of the operation they'd built, of the reputation for quality stock and honest dealing that the Raleigh name carried. In 1908, on a warm June evening, Vincent and Nora took a ride out to the old well where he'd found her. They hadn't been there in years, though the place still existed, maintained by the community as a water source for travelers. They dismounted and stood beside the well, hands linked. The prairie stretched around them in every direction, grass waving in the breeze, the sky vast and blue overhead. 26 years, Nora said softly. 26 years since I fell here, sick and scared, and I happened to ride past. Vincent squeezed her hand. Best luck I ever had. Not luck, fate maybe, or God's plan, or just two people finding each other at exactly the right moment. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it, for you, for everything we've built together. Nora turned to face him, and despite the lines on her face, the silver in her hair, he saw the same woman he'd fallen in love with. Strong and beautiful and endlessly capable. "I love you, Vincent Raleigh. I loved you when you stayed beside this well, carrying water to me day after day. I loved you when you asked me to marry you, all nervous and hopeful. I loved you through every year, every challenge, every joy, and I'll love you until the day I die. And beyond that, I hope." He cupped her face in his weathered hands, "because I plan to love you for eternity." They kissed beside that old well, in the place where their story had truly begun, surrounded by the land they'd tamed together and the life they'd built. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own moments of joy and sorrow. William James grew into a bright, energetic boy, and Clara gave birth to a daughter, Emma, in 1909. Caroline and Peter had twin girls in 1910, adding to the growing family. The twins both married Michael to a rancher's daughter from the next county, David to a teacher friend of Caroline's who fell in love with both David and the ranch life. Vincent and Nora watched it all with the contentment of people who knew they'd lived fully and well. Their ranch had grown to be one of the most respected operations in the region. Their children were happy and successful. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving. In 1912, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge party. All 4 of their children came, bringing spouses and grandchildren. Neighbors and friends from across the region attended. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and retold about the early days. Ezra McAllister, now in his 80s but still sharp, gave a toast. 30 years ago, I took a chance on a young cowboy who asked for help building a life. Best business decision I ever made, because Vincent Raleigh proved what I always believed, that given a chance, good people will build good things. Here's to 30 more years. Everyone cheered, though Vincent privately doubted he'd see 87. Still, the sentiment was appreciated. Late in the evening, as the party wound down and the grandchildren dozed in various corners, Vincent and Nora slipped away to their porch. It had become their refuge over the years, the place where they processed life and dreamed together. 30 years, Vincent said, echoing what seemed to be the phrase of the day. Doesn't seem possible. It does and it doesn't. Nora leaned against him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. Sometimes I feel every one of those years in my bones. Other times I feel like that girl at the well just starting out. You're still her. Just with more stories to tell. We both are. Still those 2 young people who decided to build something together, just with more miles on us. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house, the night sounds of the ranch beyond. This life they'd created, this legacy they were building, it was everything Vincent had never dared to dream of when he was a young cowboy with nothing but his horse and his skills. And it had all started with a choice. To stop, to help, to stay when leaving would have been easier. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Nora looked at him questioningly. "For what? For fighting. For coming back from that fever. For building this life with me. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself. For everything." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for seeing me, for staying. For showing me what partnership really means. For giving me this beautiful life." They stayed on that porch until the moon rose high, until the last guest had departed and the house had fallen quiet. Then they went inside together, to the bed they'd shared for 30 years, in the house they'd built together, on the land they'd turned into something lasting. Vincent fell asleep holding Nora close, thinking that if he died tomorrow, he'd die a happy man. He'd lived more fully, loved more deeply than he'd ever imagined possible. But he wouldn't die tomorrow. He had years left, years to spend with Nora, to watch their grandchildren grow, to see what new chapters would unfold. The Raleigh Ranch continued to prosper through the 1910s. They weathered drought and economic uncertainty, always adapting, always finding ways to thrive. James proved himself as capable a rancher as his father, and together with Michael and David, who had combined their operation with the main ranch, they expanded steadily. Caroline's teaching career flourished. She became principal of the Laramie School, known throughout the region for her innovative methods and dedication. She brought her own daughters to visit often, and they loved spending time on the ranch, getting dirty and learning to ride. In 1918, the world was gripped by war and influenza, but the Raleigh family emerged relatively unscathed. They'd learned from that long-ago fever to take illness seriously, to nurse carefully and seek help quickly. Their quick action saved several neighbors when the flu swept through, and their gratitude added to the family's already strong reputation. Vincent turned 60 in 1919. He felt it in his joints these days, the years of hard work taking their toll. But he could still ride, still work a full day when needed, still hold his own with younger men. Nora, now 59, had slowed down as well, though she remained sharp and capable. Her hair was more silver than dark now, her hands marked by age and work. But her eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor, and her smile still made Vincent's heart skip a beat. They spent more time these days in advisory roles, letting James and the twins handle the day-to-day operations while they focused on strategy and planning. It was a good balance, keeping them involved without exhausting them. In 1920, women gained the right to vote, and Nora registered with fierce pride. She'd always been interested in politics, and now she could participate directly. She and Caroline attended suffrage celebrations in Laramie, and Vincent couldn't have been prouder of both of them. The ranch had grown to over 5,000 acres, running nearly 1,000 head of cattle. They'd added sheep as well, diversifying in case the cattle market went bad. They employed several hands year-round, good men who worked hard and were treated fairly. William James, now 15, was already showing signs of being a natural leader. He worked alongside his father and grandfather, learning the business from the ground up. Emma, his younger sister, was 12 and had declared her intention to be a veterinarian, an ambition both Vincent and Nora supported enthusiastically. The twin girls, Caroline's daughters, were 10 and obsessed with horses. David had taken them under his wing, teaching them advanced riding techniques. Michael's 2 children, a boy and a girl, were 8 and 6, both showing the family's characteristic work ethic and determination. In 1922, Vincent and Nora celebrated their 40th anniversary. This party was smaller, more intimate, just family and close friends, but it was no less meaningful. James gave a toast this time. "My parents taught me everything important, how to work hard, how to treat people fairly, how to build something that lasts. But most importantly, they taught me what love looks like. Not the romantic fairy tale kind, though there's plenty of that too, but the real kind, the kind that shows up every day, the kind that works through problems instead of running from them, the kind that grows deeper with time instead of fading. That's what 40 years looks like." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. His children had turned out better than he'd dared hope, and the knowledge that they'd learned good lessons from him and Nora was perhaps the greatest achievement of his life. That night, alone in their bedroom, Nora pulled out a wooden box Vincent had never seen before. "What's that?" he asked. "Something I've been keeping. Letters, mostly. Ones I wrote but never sent over the years, about you, about us, about this life." She opened the box and pulled out yellowed pages covered in her neat handwriting. "This one is from our first year of marriage, when I was so happy I couldn't quite believe it was real. This one is from when James was born. This one is from the summer you taught Caroline to swim in the creek." Vincent took the letters carefully, touched beyond words that she'd documented their life this way. "Why didn't you ever show me these? They were for me, I suppose. A way of processing my feelings, of preserving moments I was afraid I'd forget, but I want you to have them now. So you know, In case I never said it enough, how much you've meant to me. How grateful I am for every single day we've had together." He set the letters aside carefully and pulled her close. "You've shown me every day, in 1,000 ways, big and small. I've never doubted your love, not once." "Good, because it's the truest thing about me." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, finding in each other the home they'd built together. The 1920s brought continued prosperity, but also the first real losses. Ezra McAllister died in 1923 at the age of 91, and Vincent grieved for the man who'd given him his start. Martha followed him just 6 months later, as though she couldn't bear to be apart from him. In 1925, tragedy struck when David was thrown from a horse and broke his back. For weeks, they weren't sure if he'd walk again. But with careful nursing from his wife and determination that Vincent recognized from his own family, David recovered enough to walk with a cane and continue working the ranch, though his days of breaking horses were over. Life moved forward as it always did. The grandchildren grew, some going off to college, others staying to work the ranch. Great-grandchildren began to arrive, adding new life to the family tree. Vincent and Nora, now in their 60s, settled into the role of family elders. They were consulted on major decisions, deferred to for their experience, but no longer carried the weight of daily operations. It was a relief and a loss at the same time, freedom from responsibility, but also from purpose. They found new purposes. Nora worked with Caroline to establish a library in Laramie, donating books and money. Vincent mentored young ranchers, sharing decades of accumulated knowledge freely. Together they traveled more, taking a trip to California, another to Montana to finally meet Vincent's uncle, who turned out to be alive and well. In 1930, Vincent turned 71, Nora 70. They were both moving slower now, their hair white, their faces deeply lined. But their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. "We're old," Nora said one evening, stating the obvious with a laugh. "Ancient," Vincent agreed, "but I wouldn't change anything. You, not a single thing." "Well, maybe I'd change that time the twins set the barn on fire. And possibly the winter we nearly froze to death." "And besides the disasters," Vincent interrupted, laughing. "Besides those, not one thing. This has been a good life, Vincent, better than I could have imagined." "The best," he agreed. They'd beaten the odds. They'd started with nothing and built an empire, not in terms of money, though they were comfortable, but in terms of family, legacy, community. The Raleigh name meant something in Wyoming, stood for integrity and hard work and fair dealing. In 1932, on a spring afternoon much like the one 50 years earlier, Vincent and Nora rode out to the old well one last time. They were both too old for such trips, really, but they wanted to make the journey together while they still could. The well was still there, though seldom used now that better roads and more reliable water sources existed. They dismounted carefully, helping each other, and stood hand in hand beside it. 50 years, Vincent said, since the day that changed everything. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past? If you'd decided it wasn't your problem? Sometimes. But it's not a long thought, because I can't imagine any other life. This is the only one I want. Nora squeezed his hand. We should probably head back. It's a long ride and we're not as young as we used to be. One more minute. Vincent pulled her close, holding her in the place where their story had begun. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, steady and strong despite her years. I love you, he said simply. Loved you then, love you now, will love you always. Always, she echoed. That's a promise I'm happy to keep. They rode back slowly, savoring the journey, the spring air, the feel of the sun on their faces. When they reached the ranch, family was waiting. James and Clara, the twins and their wives, Caroline and Peter visiting from town, grandchildren and great-grandchildren running everywhere. This was the life they'd built. This was the legacy they'd leave. Not just land and cattle, but love and connection. Generations linked together by the choice two people had made to build something together. Vincent and Nora lived 5 more years, dying within months of each other in 1937. Vincent went first, peacefully in his sleep at age 78, with Nora holding his hand. She followed 4 months later, at 77, surrounded by family. They were buried on the rise next to William, overlooking the ranch they'd built together. The whole community turned out for their funerals, testament to the lives they'd lived and the impact they'd had. James, now 53 and the patriarch of a large, thriving family, stood at his parents' graves after everyone had gone. William James, now 32 and with children of his own, stood beside him. They built something special, William James said, something worth preserving. They did, James agreed, and it's on us to keep building it, to pass down not just the land but the values. The importance of showing up, of doing the work, of choosing love every day. That's what Grandpa did, isn't it, when he found Grandma at the well? He chose to stop, to help, to stay, and everything came from that choice. James nodded. Everything good in our lives traces back to that moment. To a cowboy who saw someone who needed help and decided it was his problem. Who carried water to her for days, who refused to leave even when it would have been easier. They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the memory of two people who'd loved deeply, worked hard, and left the world better than they'd found it. The ranch continued under James's management, then William James's, then his children's. The Raleigh name remained synonymous with quality and integrity for generations. The story of how it all began, of a woman who collapsed at a well, and a cowboy who stayed, was passed down, parent to child, becoming family legend. Because some love stories don't start with lightning bolts or grand gestures. Some start with simple kindness, with the decision to help someone who needs it, with choosing to stay when you could walk away. And sometimes, those are the love stories that last forever.